Quite often I get asked by our clients on some different investment methodology and different investment ideas, especially our sophisticated clients who have generally started off residential properties, bought 3 or 4 properties, now looking to go and be a little bit more adventurous, probably a little bit more risk appetite to buy something a little bit bigger. So the other day I was talking to one of my industry colleagues, and he started telling me about this story about a development that he's got replicated and built a formula around of turning a $500 per week rental property into a $4,000 per week rental property. So obviously that piqued my interest. So I thought, let's get him in, let's have a chat and unpack this and understand his methodology. Hey, Jon, welcome.
Hey, thank you.
Excellent, mate. Well, I'd love to continue on our conversation the other day. It was really intriguing. So, Jon, tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe a little bit about your journey on how you got where you are.
Yeah, got into property maybe 7 or 8 years ago. Just typical first owner occupier, first time home buyer. From there, started to recognize the various strategies available in property. That led me to a small residential development that I did up in Fern Bay, up in Newcastle. After that residential development, I then moved on to commercial property, so acquiring existing commercial property, and that was from a cash flow perspective. The residential build was great from a chunk perspective, and then I kind of had a bit of a light bulb moment where I was like, well, why am I building residential for chunk and then building the residential for chunk and then the buying commercial for cash flow? So I wanted to then combine the two together, which seemed like a bit of a silly idea at the time because I just thought I needed to build a $20 million shopping center to do that. And then looking at the spectrum from shopping centers or big commercial all the way down to the lower price point and a lot more accessible, I then came across the micro apartments, also known as a 1B building. And that's where that started.
Well, thanks for that, Jon. Thanks for the intro. I'm keen to know more about what a micro apartment is. I must admit, I'm not very au fait with that terminology, but also more importantly, why? What's your why in building these type of properties?
Yeah, 100%. The 3 reasons why, again, after finding the strategy or coming across the strategy, the 3 reasons would be that there's obviously a massive housing crisis that we all know. The second is that the investment vehicles available, typically speaking, are not as attractive to investors, especially at the moment with interest rates where they are. And then thirdly, tenant experience. And that's actually the most important one for us. We believe that if you don't have a great tenant experience, if you don't create a great tenant experience, that you're not going to attract great tenants that typically stay and pay, as in those that want to rent. And if you don't have great tenants that stay and pay, high quality tenants, then do you have a great asset? Do you have a high quality asset? So yeah, we focus a lot around that tenant experience piece, and it's important to us to get that right balance between what's good for an investor and what's good for the tenant. You see on that scale, there's some properties that are very good for the investor, and there's some that are very good for the tenant, as in kind of almost overcapitalized. So for us, it's finding that right balance. Obviously, good for an investor, so they actually want to put their cash into this, and then good for the tenant, so they actually want to stay and pay and enjoy the experience while they're living there.
Excellent. Well, thanks for that, Jon. Thanks for the intro. So I'm keen to know more about what a micro apartment is. I must admit, I'm not very au fait with that terminology, but also more importantly, why? What's your why in building these type of properties?
Yeah, 100%. The 3 reasons why, again, after finding the strategy or coming across the strategy, the 3 reasons would be that there's obviously a massive housing crisis that we all know. The second is that the investment vehicles available, typically speaking, are not as attractive to investors, especially at the moment with interest rates where they are. And then thirdly, tenant experience. And that's actually the most important one for us. We believe that if you don't have a great tenant experience, if you don't create a great tenant experience, that you're not going to attract great tenants that typically stay and pay, as in those that want to rent. And if you don't have great tenants that stay and pay, high quality tenants, then do you have a great asset? Do you have a high quality asset? So yeah, we focus a lot around that tenant experience piece, and it's important to us to get that right balance between what's good for an investor and what's good for the tenant. You see on that scale, there's some properties that are very good for the investor, and there's some that are very good for the tenant, as in kind of almost overcapitalized. So for us, it's finding that right balance. Obviously, good for an investor, so they actually want to put their cash into this, and then good for the tenants, so they actually want to stay and pay and enjoy the experience while they're living there.
But so who is the type of people you can help with this type of development strategy?
So it's typically sophisticated investors. So back to kind of the initial story, it started off with acquiring an apartment in Sydney and then building residential property. What I've found is that for those that have done 5 or 6 plus properties, kind of buy and hold, they normally run into a few challenges, whether it's serviceability or even kind of getting kind of to later on in their investment journey and realizing that they have a great equity position in terms of portfolio, but they don't necessarily have the cash flow from the portfolio that they expect. Whether that's due to kind of refinancing or whatever that means, or whatever that reason is, typically, as Robert Kiyosaki says, it's not just based on the portfolio of assets that you have, it's what cash flow you're getting from that portfolio of assets. So in terms of who these buildings are for, it's really sophisticated investors that want to go faster.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we have a lot of clients who, like I said at the beginning, buying those 3 or 4 residential properties, a little bit more mature in age, looking at that last tranche of their working careers. It might be the last 10 years or 15 years of working careers where cash flow is going to be important to set themselves up for retirement. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, we also believe that you need to create a great tenant experience to be able to attract great tenants, stay and pay. And then to attract great tenants that stay and pay, then creates a great asset. So I guess what we found is that on the spectrum of what's good for the investor versus what's good for the tenant, my opinion of what was or how the strategy is being used is very good for the investor. However, we wanted to find a balance that was actually great for the tenant as well. Yeah, so that was kind of one of our, obviously housing crisis and ABS website kind of, I think it's lone living or lone person living is an uptrend. Younger people who don't want to live at home anymore, they're maybe not coupled up yet in terms of kind of afford a 1-bedroom apartment. So instead, a micro apartment in terms of the tenants is a big convenience play. So
yeah, and even that statistic we read about, displaced women over the age of, was it 45 or 55 in that bracket, it was quite an increasing ratio of people who are now either homeless or looking for that type of accommodation where it's safe and they're not sharing, and it becomes a community as well, which is really important.
Yeah, 100%. I think that creating the assets from an investor's perspective is great for tenants. Then also creating micro communities by putting together, when tenants want it, but putting together kind of like-minded people or those that actually might be suited to. Yeah, you make a good story. We were talking about, I think when we were chatting through this, an older lady who husband unfortunately went into a home, and she moved closer to that to be near her husband, and after 6 months she didn't have that same reason to be in that location, yet she extended for another 12 months. And when understanding her circumstance, she was actually a big convenience play for her, as in it was a smaller living space. Each micro apartment would be around 28 to 35 square meters.
Right.
And all bills included. So kind of electric, water, internet, the convenience of just paying one rent and everything is included, fully furnished. So it's walk in with your suitcase and your bed sheets, and away you go.
Well, you can see how it's such attractive to as you said, I love the ethical approach to what you're doing as well, right? Make it attractive, not just to the investor, which is obviously important because that's the person who's going to build it and fund it, but also to the tenant and, making, I love the word you kept using, with community, which is really important to make this, again, an attractive investment, but attractive for the tenant as well.
Yeah, and you're right. There's lots of, this is built purposely for those that want to rent, for those that are in a location for mid to long term, whether it's rent investors who want to be able to afford their own space while they invest in property elsewhere. It's also, there's some tenants who actually have a big empty nest. It's their main asset, and they can rent that out, move into one of these, and be cash flow positive from the moment they move in. So yeah, there's a few different reasons that we thought that this is a really good strategy. Yeah, to kind of tenant experience, investors, And yeah, a housing crisis is not going anywhere.
No, that's right, unfortunately. So tell me, I mean, obviously, thanks for the background on the model and from both sides of the model as well. But tell me about finance. I'm sure that's very different to what we're used to in residential buying.
So typically, we'll find a site, we'll find a residential property. We'll be able to secure development finance, which doesn't require serviceability, and that's based upon getting a valuation of what's the end asset going to be worth.
Right.
We can then get a loan for that, and then the funds are made up by the investor, and typically around that 65 to 70% LVR.
Okay.
So it means that the investor makes up the rest, and that then covers the project end to end. Now, because of the strength of the leases at the end, they can actually be refinanced without serviceability at the end as well. So some of the investors that we have worked with are those that can't necessarily service, good capital base, but do want to create more cash flow using that asset base.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And have you experienced, I know obviously you're working on a few projects now, but are the top 4 banks friendly to this type of development, or are we looking more the tier 2?
Yeah, more tier 2. I think I know that the big 4 banks are interested in it, but only once the debt is at a certain point.
Yeah.
So they will, again, kind of more for sophisticated investors. Big 4 banks will look at it as an asset type for either the refinance, but the actual development side of things is more tier 2. Those that understand the asset and understand how to value it. Yeah, otherwise you just get crazy LVRs, crazy.
Makes sense. We often get asked this question, John. I was just thinking while you were talking, like, why do I need you? Like, why can't I just go and buy a house, knock it down, get someone to draw me a plan and build this myself and then find the tenants? I'm sure there's a lot of work that goes into it, but it'd be great to hear your side. Why can't I do it myself?
Yeah, 100%. And people, I do know people that have done it themselves. What we've found is that bridging the gap between a typical investor, as in a buy and hold investor, those that might be high income or even not so, but they don't necessarily have the time to spend on either education or understanding property development to reduce the risk. So we're essentially, the bridge between a property investor and a property developer, repeating the same processes. I don't know if it's the best way of putting it, but trying to be as boring as possible so that it's the highest reward, lowest risk.
Yeah.
In terms of, so where this actually came from is after I'd walked this path a few times in terms of our own developments, we actually had then sophisticated investors that came to us to say, could you do that for me? And yeah, we were like, sure. So essentially our big goal is to create as many homes as possible. And whoever holds the asset at the end is it doesn't really matter. However, we're essentially reducing the risk and increasing the reward by taking someone as a delivery partner from end to end. So someone can be as involved as they like. Sometimes people are really interested to see each of the stages.
Yep.
Other people recognize the numbers and they just want to have their cash, earned income converted into passive income, and will then hand back the property fully tenanted, fully managed.
So, John, thanks for that. Yeah, that all makes sense now, or why we need you, because obviously expertise is something that a regular mum and dad investor who's in the corporate world definitely won't have that expertise to get to the end product. But you know what will help my mind and probably our listeners and our watchers is some numbers. Could you kind of go through and break down some numbers for us?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, kind of taking a property. Actually, I can show you. I do have an example. Here's one I made earlier.
Yeah, that'd be great. Nothing beats seeing some images. Yeah.
So this property here was purchased for 650.
Sorry, that's the land and the house, that whole property.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And sorry, can I ask, that was in Brisbane, John, or?
In Brisbane, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
In case from the CBD within the last couple of years. So investor wanted us to source a site that was subdividable. So we sourced this site. We had it rented for a period of time by a tenant. It was rented at $500 a week. We then demoed the house, did a subdivision, and then constructed 2 micro apartment buildings, so 10 apartments, which will be handed over in the next couple of months, and will be
10 apartments.
10 apartments, yeah. So
how big's the block, John?
600 and 50 square meters.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So this is then the after.
Wow. Even looks like a different block altogether.
Yeah. Before,
Yeah.
5 days a week. After.
Where's the White House gone on the right? Has that just been just a different? You've placed the property a little bit further back by the looks of it.
We picked up the neighbor's house and just moved it over. I think it's just cropped out on that one.
Okay. Yep.
And then this is kind of from above as well. So this is before. There was a pool in the back, which meant there was some additional subdivision works.
Yeah.
And then this is after. So again, that 1 weekly rent. Solar covers the electric, covers the power.
Jeez, what's that, like about 60 panels up there or something, maybe more?
Yeah. I think it's 15 kilowatts.
You could light half of Brisbane with that.
There used to be, I think the tariffs changed, but it used to be the solar actually would give you a credit.
Wow.
As opposed to costing you anything. So there'll then be 4 car parking spaces on each side, and then everyone's got their own courtyard or balcony.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of the before and after.
Was that a challenge to get that through council with the balconies, looking over neighbours and things like that? How did that all go, like with the neighbours?
Yeah, so the approval process was pretty straightforward.
Okay.
The reason being is understanding what's code accessible. So I think our average DA timeframes is about 20 days, which quite a lot of people gasp at that. And our personal best is 9 business days of getting the subdivision approval.
So obviously the brown paper bag still works at council, doesn't it?
All having a good town planner.
Yeah.
So it's something that's absolutely accepted in the area. There's no pushback. Again, it's essentially from the street front. It's just 2 large houses. So they're purpose built to look like everything else in the street. Although kind of granted that these are probably larger and newer looking than everything else on the street.
Yeah, sure.
But I mean the suburbs.
Is that brick, John, or Hebel? What have you used as a materials? Are they different bottom to top?
I don't actually have the materials. I actually need to get closer to the materials so I can understand. It's not brick.
That's okay. Yeah, it would make sense in that type of. And then you landscape that all out. Obviously, put the the parking spots and everything else as part of your plans. Yep.
Yeah. So going through the front door, there'll then be there's a shared kitchen, a shared kitchen that the tenants don't really use.
Okay. So shared kitchen for all of them to use. That's at the front of the house. Is that right?
For compliance reason, there's a full kitchen.
Yeah.
However, it's not typically used by the tenants because they have their own kitchenettes.
Yeah.
Which has kind of basic cooking. They come fully furnished, and there's hot plates. Actually, don't put hot plates. Maybe as in it comes with all of the required.
Yeah, so two knobs or cooking knobs. Is it gas? Electricity?
Electric.
Yep.
Electric. Yeah. So each of the apartments would have 6 zones. 6 zones. There would be a double bedroom. There would be the ensuite bathroom, kitchenette, dining area, living room, and then an outdoor area.
Yeah, great.
So outdoor area being, as you can see here, a balcony or a courtyard.
Yep. And so the rear ones have the same balcony on the other side. Is that right?
Yeah. Correct.
Okay.
And then, the only shared space for the tenants is laundry. So there's 2 washing machines in each house.
Yep.
And that's really the shared facilities. Otherwise, everything else is in their own kind of 30 square meter apartment.
Excellent. It's really amazing concept and well done. This looks amazing. I'm blown away from the quality and the scope of what you've done. How does it just in terms of the tenant side of things, cleaning, all those type of things? Is that a common fund, or are they responsible for themselves?
Yeah, so
especially the common areas.
Yeah, so factored into kind of also back to the numbers. So
yeah.
Gross numbers of about 110,000 a year gross.
Okay.
Once you take off the costs, kind of net operating income would be around that kind of 78 to 80, and then factored into those costs between the gross and the net operating income would be a cleaner to go through the common areas, also gardener to do the maintenance. So yeah, typically factored into those costs is maintenance and cleaning as well.
Yeah, so that's it's a full 360 product. It's not something that's going to get built and then left, which happens, right? In some of these co-living properties and left to almost turn into a ghetto. So it's obviously a product that's going to stand the test of time from a quality perspective. And the rough numbers, John, on a deal like this, like what sort of cash would a customer need to look at, from either cash or equity?
Yeah, so from start to finish, around that 700 to 800 be needed is available for interest payments and the funds to complete. That would get a client end to end from acquisition all the way through to handing over the keys of 10 apartments. Yeah. So again, it's kind of for those that have done a couple of typical kind of existing residential purchases, maybe started to look at commercial, maybe even acquired some commercial, and then actually want to get into development, but maybe you don't have the knowledge to do that, but do see, I guess, kind of the reward for creating commercial from the ground up.
Excellent. Going back to, actually, I was really interested in what you said earlier in the conversation about the type of tenants that you would attract to this type of quality build. So what typically are you, because I'm assuming you're using data to find out the areas you're buying. You're not just buying in an area because you get cheap land. You've done your research and your homework with your management company as well. So who is this attracted to? What sort of tenants come in and rent these properties?
Typically the high-end blue collar, low-end white collar, kind of young professionals. So those that perhaps are ready to move out of home might not necessarily be coupled up yet to be able to afford the 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. Each micro apartment would be for individual living.
So a couple can't live in one, if, like you said, they do couple up?
Yeah, correct. So it's geared towards individual living, or it's compliance around having individual occupants. So yeah, for those that are young professional, and then at the other end of the spectrum, a reality is that over 55s, divorcees, and also widowed is also
growing.
Yeah, it is, and it's appealing to, I think, each end of the spectrum. It's appealing for different reasons. So convenience play for both ends, I would say, the young professionals and the kind of over 55s, and then for the younger crowd, kind of just that independence, their own space. Yeah, again, not necessarily coupled up, and being able to share costs of an apartment, and then living in a smaller kind of, again, micro apartment. The older over 55s really kind of appreciate the convenience of just one rent and everything's included. So yeah, there are some people who move interstate, new job, for example, and typically we see people get a rent for 6 months because they're new to the product type. They're like, well, it's fully furnished and maybe I won't like it, maybe the internet won't be that good. And then after 6 months, we more often than not see them renew for another 12 months. That for us is a measure of whether the tenant experience is where we want it to be. And I'd say our average tenure across the tenants that we have, probably around that 18 months mark, typically speaking.
Right. I noticed you didn't say students.
Yeah. So I guess kind of more of a personal choice. Yeah. Students, I think, suited to student accommodation. We all know those stories. People like to tell the story about how they, got up to all sorts of uni and kind of, sometimes parties and kind of I'll just say it as it is, but essentially kind of trashing the place sometimes.
Yeah, of course.
And so although these are near to unis and TAFEs, for now we're trying to keep that tenant profile, either young professionals or, as I said, the other end of the spectrum. Yeah. Excellent.
All right, John. Well, that's great. That's a really good summary for our clients. So, John, thank you again for today. That's really interesting content for our community. What's the best way for someone to learn more, to get in touch with you?
Yeah. Email, Facebook, Instagram, through Search Party. Yeah, any of those ways.
Thanks again, and we look forward to partnering with you.
Thank you, Julian.
Pleasure.